seats for the last DRCOG meeting of 2014. I know you're all very excited to be here. I appreciate everyone coming to the earlier start today. So I am going to call the meeting to order and ask that we rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. There's no new members, right? Sorry? No new members. Okay. Okay. Okay, we're going to start with the roll call.
Eva Henry. Bill Holen.
Here.
Elise Jones. Here. Dennis Harvard. Greg Stokes. Tim Mock. Here. Christy Fanganello. Here. Chris Nevitt. Robin Kniech. Roger Partridge. Here. Gail Watson. Connie McLean. Don Rozier. Bob Pfeiffer.
Here.
Bob Roth.
Here.
Sue Horn. Here. David Spellman. Suzanne Jones. Tim Plass. Ann Justin. Rick Pilgrim. Lynn Baca. Cynthia Martinez. George Teal. Here. Kathy Noon. Here. Ron Engels. Catherine Hyder. Doug Tisdale.
Here.
Gail Christie. Jim Benson. Rick Teeter. Charles Sigmund. Todd Riddle. Laura Keegan. Randy Penn. Joe Jefferson. Dan Woog. Mark Gruber. Joyce Thomas. I thought I saw Joyce.
Sorry. Here.
George Heath. Samantha Meering. Lisa Jones. Laura Brown. Henry Ergott. Paula Bovo. Doris Rigoni. Saoirse Karras-Graves. Here. Ron Rakowski.
Present.
Mike Hillman. Brad Weasley. Stacy Luberger. Shakti.
Here.
Jerry Bean. Phil Cernanek.
Present.
Jackie Millay.
Here.
Gabe Santos.
Here.
Ashley Stolzman. Bob Muckle. John O'Brien. Connie Sullivan. Colleen Whitlow.
Here.
Deborah Jerome. Sean Foray. Chris Larson. Joe Gillock. Joyce Downing. Carol Dodge. John Dyack. Gary Howard.
Here.
Rita Dozel. Sandy Pennington. Val Vigil.
Here.
Herb Atchison. Joyce J. Doug Young. Deborah Perkins Smith. Simon Tafoya. Bill Van Meter.
Here.
And we have a quorum.
Great, we have a quorum this evening. I am now looking for a motion to approve the agenda.
To amend the agenda to move item 11, dealing with allocation of first phase funds, ahead of item 10, which deals with second phase project selection, in other words, to swap items 10 and 11.
Second.
A motion and a second. Can all those in favor please say aye, or is there discussion? Excuse me, would anyone care for discussion on this? Okay, all those in favor please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstained? Motion carries. Thank you. May I have a motion to approve the revised consent agenda then?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstained? Motion carries. Thank you very much. Now we're going to move on to the report of the chair, and I get to do something fun. It's my Christmas present. We have 4 distinguished members at the DRCOG board table, well, they're not all here this evening, who have been serving at DRCOG for 5 years, and I honestly wish I was giving you more than this lovely, lovely clock. They are actually really nice, but I really do want to call you up individually and have you all acknowledged. So please, first, Mayor Ron Rakowski from Greenwood Village, come on down.
Come on down.
Do I get time off for good behavior? That's part of the penalty.
No, you don't. No time off. Okay. Joyce Thomas from Federal Heights, please. And thank you. Okay, Jim Benson from Commerce City. We're talking about you, Jim. Come on down. You get your 5-year clock. You get a present. Come on. He's like, wait a minute.
He didn't look at the agenda.
Hey, somebody didn't look at their packet.
It's pretty. It is. Looks like it's keeping accurate time, too.
Oh, you got it.
Nice color. It'll go in my living room nicely. It does.
Wow. Thank you.
Wow.
It's a nice little clock.
Yeah, that's for later. And last but certainly not least is Val V. Hill from Thornton. Come on, Val. Okay, so I was commenting earlier that 1 year at the DRCOG table is kind of like dog years. So 5 years here is kind of like 35 years in the regular world. So I just want to, again, now that everyone is here, give a great round of applause to the members at the DRCOG board table who've got 5 years. And as chair prerogative, is there anybody here who has been serving longer than 5 years? It's at this. All right, in 2 turns. So I'd like to acknowledge Sue Horn and Mayor Doug Tisdale as well. Thank you guys for your contribution. And I don't know about the rest of you, but it feels like more than 5 years to me, and I haven't even hit that mark yet. So the fun is over with. The other thing I would like to comment on briefly is CDOT's Transportation Matters Summit. I know I saw some faces at that this year, and I don't know if it's going to be an annual event, but it really was a very worthwhile event that was put on by CDOT. And I just want to encourage everyone to take a look for that next year. And I think it was really, I got a lot out of it, and I really appreciate the work they did sponsoring that event. So cheers to them. Okay, other business at hand. I want to welcome back our esteemed executive director, who looks much more refreshed than the rest of us do during the holiday season. So we miss not having you here. So before I turn it over to you, though, I do want to set a public hearing. So the Denver Regional Council of Governments hereby schedules a public hearing to receive comments on the 2040 fiscally constrained regional transportation plan and associated air quality conformity determinations. The hearing will be held before the Board of Directors at 6:30 p.m. at the DRCOG offices on January 21st, 2015. For further information, please contact the Executive Office at DRCOG at 303-455-1000 or write to the Denver Regional Council of Governments, 1290 Broadway, Suite 700, Denver, 80203. And all of the information is also on our website if you can't write as fast as I speak. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will be very brief. First, going to start out with these 2 handouts. First, the green one. This is related to your annual board workshop. Please plan to attend. Put it on your calendar right now if it's not already there, and let Connie know that you're going to be there and get your room reservations made. The officers and Flo Rotano and I just met and talked a little bit about what that agenda is going to look like. We're going to spend a lot of time kind of teeing up and familiarizing you with the issues that you'll be voting on later on in 2015. So it's very important to get in on the ground floor of that if you're new to DRCOG. The other handout I want to bring your attention to is for DRCOG Award nominations, we will be recognizing many of your communities this spring for all the great work that you're doing. So don't forget to make your nominations by 4 p.m. on January 30th. And other than to say I'm glad to be back and in the middle of all this, I'll turn it back over to the chair.
It's come to my attention that there are actually some alternates sitting at the board table whose members are here, and as much as we love them and want to welcome you here, it isn't, no, you're not the only one. Tom Hayden as well, and as gentlemen, as much as it just gets confusing with the voting, that if we could kindly ask or respectfully request that you sit in the audience, I would greatly appreciate it. And I was remiss in reminding everyone that we will be having an open house this evening at the conclusion of the board meeting. And last but not least, and more will come later, that this is Mayor Doug Tisdale's last meeting with us for this round. But knowing Doug, I expect a third round at the DRCOG table from him. And as I told him before, you know, again, I'm repeating myself, not going to cry that it's over. I'm smiling because it happened, and I'm happy that I was able to share some time at this table with you. So more praise for you to come later, but just wanted to make sure I got that out too. With that, I am going to open the floor for public comment this evening. Up to 45 minutes is allocated at this time for public comment. Each speaker will be limited to 3 minutes. If there are additional requests from the public to address the board, time will be allocated at the end of the meeting to complete public comment. I will request that there be no public comment on issues for which a prior public hearing has been held before this before this board, and consent and action items will begin immediately after the last speaker. It's also, just as a refresher, the public hearing that I just set for the RTP, that any public comment directly related to that we would prefer to happen at the January 21st meeting as well. So thank you all for your consideration with that. Seeing that, I see we have someone here for public comment. Please, sir.
My name is Randall Loeb. I'm a citizen. And tonight is also, besides the open house, the time when we honor all of those citizens in the metro region along the Front Range who died, who had been homeless at some point. I have the privilege of reading a prayer and poem, and also of sharing in the burden of saying we will remember. And so your vicarious participation is occurring right now, because I have to flash over across to the east steps of the city and county building to perform my civic responsibility in honoring those people. Several people on that list are people who have been friends of mine. And I always say that we need a statewide memorial to actually do justice to the fact that citizens who have lived in our communities, all of our communities, as I read the names of the places you come from, have had people in them who have died, who've been outside at some point or other, or in a precarious place, escaping from domestic violence, or undocumented, or families with single parents that couldn't afford a place to stay. And touching that point, one of our most critical needs regionally is the housing to help it be possible. I was part of the MetroVision Citizen Advisory Committee. I was very honored to be allowed to participate in that. I would love to participate much more and have many of my friends do, but we need to really talk seriously about how do we do justice to all of our citizens as it says in your vision. And I thank you for your time, and I'm honored to be able to be here, and my dress has to do with the outside, so please forgive me.
Thank you. Is there, yes, thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I just wanted to say that I would like to suggest that this board and the executive board in the future consider getting your alternates much more engaged with DRCOG, because I have actually been coming to meetings as the alternate for the City of Thornton since latter 2009, and have been the alternate for the City of Thornton since 2010. And I think that it's very important for the alternates to get a flavor for what this board actually does so that they don't have to come in and sit in a meeting when their representative is gone and have the deer in the headlights look. So I know that you're working on some things, and there are going to be some changes coming down the pike, and I just wanted to say thank you to the entire board. I've served or had the opportunity to sit at the table with many of you in the past, and I look forward to working with you in the future. My name is Beth Martinez-Humanik. I have been a city council member for 7 years with the city of Thornton, and Doug, wish you all the best, and you're going to be missed at this board with your technical writing changes. So thank you.
Beth, thank you for your service at the DRCOG board table, and best wishes to you in your future endeavor at the State House. Yes, sir.
Madam Chair, directors, thank you for this opportunity to present during the public comment period. My name is Myron Hora. I'm the Planning and Environmental Director for CDOT Region 4. What I'm here to talk to you today is part of your agenda, items 10 and 11 that you just switched around. Because what I wanted to do is request that you consider I-25, we call it I-25 North, but it's basically 120th North project that we're building or planning on building in the coming years for funding during your second phase selection process. When the call for projects came out last summer, we thought we were fully funded and could get our project completed. We're all facing cost escalation across the board. So right now we're not getting as far in developing the scope that we had originally planned. So I'm asking that you consider this project as part of a funding package. We're working with Region 1, looking at all of their available different programs, RTD, HPTE, there at CDOT, and private entities to try to find how do we put this whole thing together in order to achieve the scope that we had originally planned on. So I would ask again that you think about this project and direct staff and TAC to take a look at this project in consideration of about a $5 million award as part of that second phase selection process during the second phase project scenario development. And with that, I need to go get back to Greeley because my daughters are dancing in a dance recital. And if any of you have daughters in dance, I have about a $2,000 ticket in order to go get there and sit in my seat. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the board. My name is Rich McClintock. I'm a longtime public interest advocate in this region and proud recipient of the DRCOG Distinguished Service Award. I think it was one way to try to get me to go retire. I'm just kidding. But had many roles here and appreciate all the work that you do. I'm here tonight to just bring you a reminder as we look ahead to 2015 about clean air. Since the last board meeting, the President and EPA Administrator Gina McCarthy announced that the Environmental Protection Agency will be proposing a lower standard for ozone. And it turns out, while we all know that clean air has been an issue in the Denver region for a number of years, and we think of the brown cloud, increasingly what people who are especially new to the region don't realize is that ozone pollution that's formed from emissions primarily from transportation, power plants, and increasingly from oil and gas is contributing to unhealthy levels of air, particularly for children and seniors, and that results in respiratory ailments. We see an increase in hospitalization on high pollution days, and the current standard is 75 parts per billion, and consistently, many of you are experts in this, know that the Regional Air Quality Council consistently pushes hard to get us right under the standard, which is 74 is our current average, and many times the violations occur throughout the region which have put the Denver region right on the cusp of violating the current standard. So between your last meeting and this meeting, the EPA has proposed that sometime late next fall the Environmental Protection Agency will be setting a lower standard between 65 and 70 parts per billion. So I hope that as you consider, we'll talk next year in January through April about the Regional 2040 plan, and when we first worked together on the Metro Vision 2020 plan, clean air was very much in our mind. And I'm here tonight just to say that the citizens throughout the Denver region are looking to your leadership to see what else can be done, particularly to reduce the amount of vehicle miles traveled through increased use of transit, biking, walking, and particularly land use planning, encouraging urban centers. So with that, thank you, and look forward to participating next year in all your decisions in the next year that you'll keep clean air and our kids in mind. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Brian Weimer from Arapahoe County. Today, Commissioner Sharp asked me to read a letter that she prepared. She was unable to attend, so she's a lot more astute and better looking than me, so don't look at me while I'm doing this. Dear Board of Directors, first let me apologize for not being able to attend your meeting on December 17th due to a previous commitment. Nonetheless, I feel it is appropriate to give some history and perspective regarding Phase 2 TIP funding as I was part of the executive committee at DRCOG when Phase 2 funding was initiated. From my recollection, the policy regarding Phase 2 funding was first considered in the 2005 to 2000 TIP policy in 2003. In response to a concern of Jefferson County not receiving an equitable share of federal funding distributed by DRCOG. The primary purpose of including Phase 2 funding was and should be for moving counties as a whole towards equity among one another. The first use of Phase 2 funding utilized 15% of the total TIP funds available, and that criteria were established in the TIP policy, and they included financial equity of projects awarded among DRCOG members at the county level, potential cost savings from merging projects, synergistic planning of projects in high priority corridors and multi-use projects, project readiness for construction, and while project scoring within the project type category will not be a primary consideration for second-tier funding, no project scoring below 50 will be selected. So that came directly from the TIP policy. In 2007 to 2012 TIP cycle, the percentage of funding for Phase 2 was increased to 25% in an effort to further the efforts of addressing inequity. Small communities, less than 10,000 population or employment, was added as another consideration criteria for Phase 2 funding. I will point out that again, the primary purpose of Phase 2 funding was to address equity. Now that the board is considering criteria for this round of Phase 2 funding in the 2016 to 2021 TIP, I would encourage you to remember the primary purpose of Phase 2 funding, and that was to create equity among the counties within DRCOG and avoid diluting the purpose with too many criteria to apply to making the project selections. It was recognized at that time the process was established that making counties equal would occur over time, not via one TIP cycle, but allocation of Phase 2 funds, which should consider the amount of dollars and percentage of under equity to making the decision for funding of the projects. Thank you for your time and service with DRCOG. I trust that this provides a little history and purpose of Phase 2 funding, and those values should be considered as you move forward in deciding the criteria for this TIP cycle.
Thank you very much. And you're going to bring that down to Connie, or did?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other people here this evening for public comment? Seeing none, I am going to close the public comment portion of our agenda and move on to the consent agenda, item number 9. May I have a motion to approve? Whoops, excuse me, did I skip something? Oh, I apologize. Brad, how could I forget Brad? And MetroVision 2040, the project briefing and review schedule, item number 8 under strategic informational briefings. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Let me pull this up real quick. So given everything that's on the agenda tonight in the open house, I really aimed for this to kind of be a light appetizer. So hopefully I get close to that.
I prefer my appetizer on the rocks.
Yes. So a few of actually the speakers that you just heard from alluded to some of the work that this board is going to be doing in 2015, and December of this year is a good time to sort of reflect a little bit and talk to you about the MetroVision plan that ultimately this board will be considering and deliberating on in the early part of next year. And I, as the overall sort of project manager for this, I got a little nervous that when this lands in your lap in January, particularly the new folks might wonder, what the heck is this? Where did it come from? Tell me a little bit about its history and that sort of thing. And given sort of how time crunched we will be when we have that conversation, I just wanted to sort of prime the pump a little bit with that conversation this evening. A little bit of background, and this is probably not news to anyone, but DRCOG has a variety of roles. We are the Metropolitan Planning Organization. We're a regional planning commission under state rules. We're the Area Agency on Aging, and I think a lot of people see these things and think of them separately, but really a lot of this work is how these things ultimately interact and intertwine with each other. For instance, as the Metropolitan Planning Organization, this board obviously makes decisions about priorities for allocating federal transportation funds, but you do it through the lens of what is the vision for this region in the future. The same is also true with our role as the Area Agency on Aging. Yes, we provide direct services to older adults and to their caregivers so that they can remain in their home and their community, but we also think more globally about a region that's aging and how do we ultimately think through a larger set of issues and create a regional plan that responds to that changing demographic. So yes, these things in many ways are separate, but we do our best to think of them in a really collective and collaborative way. So this is just a graph or an image that we've used many times to sort of show one illustration of that. This board ultimately deliberates on and adopts something called MetroVision, which is a large thought of the vision of the region in the future, and ultimately that informs things like what is the vision for transportation in this region going forward, and then when we make tough decisions about how to allocate a very scarce amount of federal transportation dollars, how do we prioritize those resources based on that vision. So this is sort of how a lot of these things ultimately come together. And we've been doing this for a long time. For those that don't know, next year is the 60th anniversary of DRCOG, and I'm sure you will be hearing a lot about that next year. But our first regional plan dates back to 1960 was the year it was adopted. So we've been thinking about the overall vision for physical development of this region for a very long time. And really what this board will be doing in the first half of next year is continuing the legacy of that conversation. And it's a continuous conversation. We are sort of, if you consider MetroVision as sort of a brand or a project or an overall product, this has really been informed or been the same set of issues that this board has been considering since 1992. Your predecessors in 1992 adopted a guiding vision for the future of this region. We really have been simply building on that ever since. For the past 20 years, we've been thinking of revising that, revising at least sort of the overall thought process that maybe goes into that, what we work on, the policies and tools that ultimately allow us as a region to achieve that vision. We have things like the urban growth boundary, a very unique and almost internationally unique way of managing growth in this region. We also have a Mile High Compact, which is ultimately intended to think about how we individually and collectively work towards that shared vision. And we've been through a series of updates, and really the last 3 years, staff in particular, as well as a series of very engaged stakeholders have been working to ultimately provide this board with the beginnings of a conversation that will ultimately become MetroVision 2040. So way back in May of 2011, the board gave staff sort of our initial direction as to what MetroVision 20 ought to consider, what ought to be its characteristics, what ought to be its attributes. And this lays out sort of the 6 key things that the board directed staff at that time, and that's really been our mantra and our orders ever since. And it really kind of boils down to just even a few things that are even maybe more simple than this. You know, come up with a shared idea of what are the critical issues in this region, what are our priorities to address them. Let's be action-oriented. Let's create a plan that sets a course for action and ultimately allows us to measure that progress towards those goals and outcomes going forward, and understand that the success of MetroVision is ultimately about collaboration and partnership. It's not about necessarily what happens at this board table every month. It's about what happens in your communities as well as the actions of partners around the region. So let's create a plan that does all of those things. So for the past 3 years, when this lands with you next month, recognize that it really is the culmination of many years of engagement activities. The first one that's listed is, for those that don't know, we've had basically 24 or so of your colleagues participating in ad hoc committees thinking about two new critical issues, the issue of housing and the issue of economic vitality. They've been active for the past 4 or 5 months really thinking through those issues. We've had 2 advisory committees that the board formed specifically to help craft a working version of the MetroVision plan, both a Citizens Advisory Committee that was mentioned earlier as well as a MetroVision Planning Advisory Committee that was made up of technical staff, both from local jurisdictions but also including subject matter experts from around the regions. We have a program called MetroVision Idea Exchanges where we bring people in this room to exchange ideas on critical issues, and we have really tried to shape that program to respond to the issues that ultimately have been talked about in the early stages of MetroVision. Surveys, online feedback, listening sessions, a series of issue summaries and reports, many of which have been shared with the board, and ultimately all of that material has sort of found its way into a working draft of the plan that you will see next month. So with all that said, what are sort of some of the big picture pieces of direction that we heard, particularly from the stakeholder side of things? And one of the big things that we heard was, MetroVision has really been around since 1992 from a guiding vision perspective. MetroVision 2020 was adopted in 1997. So we have a very real legacy program here, and we need to recognize that and build on it. A lot of the core values, in fact, all of the core values in MetroVision are really valid today, but we also need to understand that it probably should be supplemented with some other items as well, that we really ought to think about as we talk about these issues, how connected they are. I talked a little bit about the connections between sort of our key charges, but think about that from an issue and a topic perspective as well. And the other thing that you may see that's a little bit different in this version of the plan is really sort of an assessment of what our role as an organization, us being DRCOG, could be going forward in terms of advancing MetroVision 2040. And really, the other thing that we heard very loud and clear is this idea of making connections to the plan easier. We work and you work as a board to establish a regional vision, but ultimately that vision is only as good as the people that are on the ground ultimately making choices and decisions that implement the things that are valued in that vision. So let's make sure that people understand the way that they can ultimately contribute and give back in a way that ultimately implements the vision that this board adopts. So we are, when you see this next month, it really will be building on a strong foundation of MetroVision 2035 that this board adopted back in, I guess, February of 2011. These are just a few ideas of some of the things that are going to be carried forward. Trust me, there's a lot more than this. We will continue to focus on 3 key areas, growth and development, transportation, and the environment. Each of those have been sort of reviewed and updated, hopefully to make them as current as possible. We've additionally added some other new subject areas, which I'll talk about in a second. And reviewing MetroVision 2035, the technical committees that have had a role in shaping this really thought that the board did a lot of great work and some foundational outcomes that were adopted with MetroVision 2035, such as reducing VMT in the region, reducing the percent of people using single occupancy vehicles to travel to work, accommodating a larger share of population and employment in urban centers going forward, and that this plan should really recognize that good work and advance it to the degree that we can. MetroVision 2040 is going to include 5 primary elements. I won't bore you with the details on these other than to say when this comes to you, the one thing that I would certainly ask you to think about is we've made a very strong commitment to try to handle these things independently, but more importantly to talk about how important they are to each other. Ultimately, a robust transportation system really is critical to the overall economic vitality of this region, and we hope that this plan makes those connections as clear as possible. So a little bit on the sort of what you will see in terms of kind of the way that the plan is structured, because I think this sometimes throws people, and I just wanted to spend maybe just 90 seconds or so with you on this so that when it comes to you have a sense as to why it's laid out like it is. A lot of this is ultimately reflecting some of the organizational development work that's been happening at the board level, but also internally here at DRCOG. And it really is, it's a pretty simple way that we're thinking about this. We want this plan to to describe what's important to us, what do we value as a region. We wanted to then ultimately tell us, well, what are some things that we can do to help move us in that direction? And then we also want to know, well, how do we measure over time if we're there? How do we know that we've achieved success, and how do we know that we're headed in the right direction? And it's really as simple as that. I know when you flip through this, sometimes it feels a lot denser than that, but it really is as simple as sort of those three key things. So I do want to alert you to a couple of new things that will be coming your way, and I hope that these aren't news to you. But you will see a draft plan that includes plan elements related to two new issues, the issue of housing and the issue of economic vitality. Both of these, as I mentioned, have been the subject of great discussion among many of your colleagues over the last 4 or 5 months. But more importantly, we were told very early in the process, actually during your retreat back in 2013, that there were some new issues that MetroVision 2040 ought to consider, and these were two that were sort of at the top of the list. And so we've been doing quite a bit of work over the last 18 months or so to really kind of bring information to you so that you can really make policy decisions that ultimately do reflect the importance of these two issues in your overall plan for the future. And then a couple of other new issues that maybe we've spent a little bit less time talking about, and I changed this to sort of air quotes to new. I will tell you that many of our, particularly MetroVision 2035, spoke to these issues to some degree, but I think we simply have gone through a process to really elevate the importance of these issues and what you will see in MetroVision 2040. The first topic being community health and wellness. It has been a really consistent message that we've heard throughout the process, so we've devoted a lot of time and energy. We've had an idea exchange on this issue. We had an issue paper that we shared with INVIC and the board. We actually had a presentation with INVIC back in June, and again, it's just been something that has been a really critical message throughout the process that the overall community health of this region is a primary economic asset that we really can't take for granted. And another issue that has really kind of elevated, and it's been surprising to me how consistent this message has been from a variety of stakeholders, is this idea of community resiliency. How as a region we are prepared for and can respond to natural disasters. I've heard it not just from communities that have been impacted by these events, but from communities around the region, and this really is advancing a policy amendment that was actually board initiated back in 2012 and adopted by the board in 2013 that added some new policy language in MetroVision 2035 about wildfire preparedness. And so we really, we're trying to elevate this conversation in MetroVision 2040 as well. So really carrying forward that intent that we heard previously from the board. So with all that said, I also wanted to give you kind of a notion of how this is going to come to you and what to expect. We're currently working through a working draft that really is the stakeholders' perspective that was obviously be shared with the board. We've described it as the job of our technical committees is simply to set the table for the board to have your discussion, and we understand that your discussion is really paramount in this process. We are aiming to have a working draft to you in January of next year, and really have at this point kind of allocated at least 3 months to the deliberation process, February, March, and April, with both INVIC and the board being very active in that conversation. The one thing that you'll see on here that I sort of put a question mark on, and I think we'll sort of just feel this out going forward, is this idea of, do we try to sort of tackle the whole plan all at one time, or do we kind of roll it out in sort of manageable chunks? And so, for better or worse, I'm almost feeling that the February INVIC meeting may kind of be our guinea pig meeting to figure out how this might work best, because I know the ad hoc committees struggled a little bit thinking on a single issue, knowing that it's probably present throughout the plan. And so I don't want you to be overwhelmed, but at the same time I want us to be able to be as structured in that conversation as possible. So we are targeting May of next year for a public hearing on MetroVision 2040, and then hopefully June adoption. There are, unlike some of our work as an MPO, there are no hard and fast deadlines with this, but obviously we want to move as fast as we can. A few things just that I ask you to keep in mind as we go forward here. Please recognize that MetroVision is really about regional aspirations. The sentence on the slide that's in quotes has been something that's been in MetroVision for a very long time. It's a long-standing principle that holds just as true today as it did back in the late 90s, that this is a regional-wide plan that really, its implementation at the local level is simply about context and circumstance. Wherever you fit within the continuum of what's sort of espoused in MetroVision is really what's most important. Please recognize that MetroVision is the primary policy statement of this board, but in addition to that, it is also kind of a shared set of goals and expectations of all of our regional partners around the region that ultimately do work, hopefully collectively, but oftentimes individually towards that shared set of vision and goals. And the other key thing the reminder is, don't confuse MetroVision, the policy document, with our work program. I believe there should be some relationship between those two things, but they are not the same thing. And so let's think big picture as we are reviewing the MetroVision document, and recognize that ultimately its success is dependent on many partners, not just DRCOG, but many people and organizations around the region. So just to give you an idea of kind of what's coming up in the next few months or what's happened recently. So again, we've had two committees that really have been shepherding this process for the last 2 years. They've both had their final meetings this month. The MetroVision Planning Advisory Committee had their last meeting today. The Citizens Advisory Committee last met on December 9th. Our standing Transportation Advisory Committee is having one last meeting in December to sort of think about some of the transportation issues. And once we get through that, and in some ways the technical work is done, unless obviously this group feels like there's still more work to be done. The Economic Vitality Group has finished kind of an outline as to what they see as sort of the key policy strategies, but they did request some time with some economic development professionals around the region to sort of just make sure that they landed in the right place, and so we have scheduled that meeting. With that, we're also going to do an internal sort of copy edit review. If you've worked with folks that review documents like this, they want to wait until you have it as final as possible, and obviously final in this case means final before it comes to you for even more work. So we are doing some sort of internal kind of copy edit type stuff over the next month or so. And then really, hopefully, as a fallback position, with the MVIC agenda packet in February, you will see a full working draft of MetroVision 2040 as developed by staff and stakeholders. If we can get it out before that, we will do that. But at minimum, that's sort of the fallback position in terms of timing. And Madam Chair, that's it for my presentation. I'm happy to answer questions if anyone has anyone. Otherwise, you will be seeing a lot of me early next year.
It's the preview. I just want to reiterate how important the MetroVision document is to the work at the DRCOG table. I know we hear a lot of this talk and we think, oh, vision statements and policy and blah, blah, blah. Let me tell you why you should care. 25 points out of the 100 possible points that we can get in our TIP projects are awarded based on this document. And some people may not have been happy with the way their project scored in the last TIP round. And this is one way that you can provide input on future TIPs, is through the development of this MetroVision document. So the board officers were in discussion before this meeting today and felt really strongly that this is a very important effort that we are going to be undertaking, and we would like to be devoting some of the time at the February workshop to the MetroVision 2040 plan. And I think for that very reason alone, I think it's really important that as many of you that as possible can really attend that workshop. I know the idea of spending Saturday with us doesn't sound great, but it's going to be fun. I promise you'll enjoy it. But this is very important. It's probably one of the most important things you'll do at this table. So, and Elise Jones would like to speak on this also.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to highlight and build on what Jackie just said, MetroVision is also really important because it's our opportunity as the leaders of the Metro region to shape the future of our region, and whether or not the brown cloud goes away, whether or not our roads are clogged with traffic, whether or not we protect our water quality, whether or not our economy is vibrant. All of these things, the actions that we take around this table, have an impact, and we do that through the vision we create with MetroVision. So it really is an important document. It's going to be the most important thing that we all do next year. So I just wanted to add another highlight for why it's important that we all engage in this process.
So we have partaked of the Kool-Aid, and we would like you to join us. Okay. All right. Anybody else have any other comment? With that, we'll move on in the agenda. So, yeah. So I'm now going to move to item 9, the consent agenda. Thank you. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstained. Thank you. The consent agenda is approved. We're going to move on to the action agenda, and then pursuant to our decision earlier this evening, we are going to start with what is listed in your printed document as number 11, move to approve allocation of first phase funds and the 2016-2021 Transportation Improvement Program first phase projects. Doug Rex.
Great. Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and season's greetings to everybody. Bread is the appetizer. I guess that makes me the multiple course entree. As they say, you're not at the table, you're on the menu, so hope you don't tear me up too much tonight. But on first phase, you know, we did a call for projects, as you all know, painfully know, for our 2016 to 2021 TIP, our upcoming Transportation Improvement Program for the first 4 years of that document. And you know, as part of that process, you know, well, once we close it in September, we spent the last 2 months actually reviewing and evaluating, you know, the eligibility and completeness of the applications and adjusting scores. They didn't all go down; some went up as well. So, so we did our part in the preparation of those applications. And then, as we traditionally have done, we formed a peer review panel made up of volunteers of our transportation. Our technical advisory committee, and that was held on November 13th. And really the purpose of that meeting is to basically get their concurrence or help us in reviewing the staff's interpretation of those projects to make sure that you know, that they're not necessarily that they agree, but they understand exactly the reasons for the interpretation. And coming out of that review panel, there were no objections to the staff's application of the criteria. And then once that was done, we reached out to all the applicant communities, because we certainly didn't want there to be any surprises, you know, as we went forth through TAC and through MVIC of scoring adjustments. So the table. Does everybody have a copy? I have some additional here, 20 additional if anybody needs one. Great, very much. Great, thank you very much. So what you have here, Table 1 is basically the list of all projects that we received as part of the call for projects. And you'll see projects shaded in different colors. The first that are highlighted in green are the projects that are proposed to be funded in Phase 1. And before I get into that in greater detail, what I might point out, golly, Todd got my copy. There we go. I got it. I might point out that you might recall, you know, as part of our TIP policy discussion, that we established targets for each project type, right? So the table you have, you'll see that it's grouped by project type. The first is bicycle pedestrian, and then we have transit services and transit passenger facilities. And in the far right on the top, you see on the bicycle pedestrian projects line, you'll see in red first phase target funding, which is $20,979,000. That was the target that was established for first phase bicycle pedestrian projects. So what we do as staff, once we know the scores, the adjusted scores, we go down through the list until, thank you very much, until we run out of money. And you know, it never is as clean as you would like it to be. There's always, you know, the last project. There's never enough to fund it to the total funding request. So in those situations, what we've done historically, and we did this time, is that we reached out to those entities that had a project that could only be partially funded in first phase, and we asked if they were interested in the portion, the balance that was left over. In some cases, such as on the second page, in the roadway capacity and roadway operational projects, you'll see in the Roadway Capacity Project, the Denver Martin Luther King project, the funding request was for $8.5 million. We had $7.1 available, and we asked them if they would be able to, if their project was scalable enough that they would accept that funding amount, which they did. In two cases that occurred, it was the MLK project, and then in the roadway operational improvement projects, the Arapahoe ILIF project. Both fell into that category. There were two other areas in which we did have a balance, and we reached out to the communities, and they decided not to accept it for, as you will see, for obvious reasons. The Boulder 30th and Colorado project, for example, it was a $6 million project, and there was only $679,000 left, so obviously their project wasn't scalable enough to do their project on that. And the other was a Commerce City Transit Service project, which was $1.3 million, and it was only $370 million left. So I mention all that to you to point out that those projects that we were only able to partially fund, those projects then, the remaining portion of that project that was not funded, it then becomes eligible for second phase. And those two, and the amounts that are eligible for second phase are highlighted in blue. Okay? And then, of course, every other project that is listed on here that is not green, so blue and white projects, are all eligible for second phase. Are there any questions on that so far? Okay. So let's get to MVIC's recommendation, and we did meet last week? Yeah, a week from today, actually. And yes, it was. We had a very good discussion about this, but ultimately what MVIC decided, and is your recommendation to you all today, is to fund the first phase projects highlighted in green. And the other portion of that recommendation and action that we need from you all this evening is the balance that exists from first phase, and partially that has to do with, well, it has to do with two things. The cases in which there was a balance in the project type that the next available sponsor did not want to accept the money, and also there were categories such as roadway reconstruction in which the first phase target was $19.6 million, and there was a balance of $5.4 million left. So there were a couple categories like that where we didn't actually meet the target. So it all adds up to about $7.791 million that it's unallocated in first phase, and MVIC's recommendation was to roll that over into second phase, and that ultimately would give a total of $51.497 million available for your consideration in second phase. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Chris.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I apologize for being late. I was hoping just to get here for the party, but
me too.
I timed things badly. I get the whole process; it all makes sense. Just in looking at sort of the symmetry of this, maybe you can just explain sort of what the thought process of MVIC was. So looking at the first group of projects, bicycle pedestrian projects, there's 20.9 million for the total pot. You get to a running cost of 20.3 million with the Aurora project, so that means there's 600,000 left. The next project down, which had 73.7 points, clearly breaks the bank at 6 million. But the next project right below it is Superior, that costs precisely $600,000, which is kind of, exactly what's left in the pot. Is there a reason for not, just skipping the Boulder project, nailing the Superior project, closing it out, and then moving to the second phase?
So I'm going to defer to the chair of the MVIC meeting to respond to that, because there was extensive conversation at the MVIC meeting about that particular project and problem. So, and I think anybody who was at, I think the majority of people in this room were actually at the MVIC meeting. It was a very thorough discussion. Raise your hand if you weren't at the MVIC meeting.
Raise your
Okay.
hand if you don't want to talk about it.
No, 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 no. So, but I am going to defer to the MVIC chair to review the thinking of the, but I will cut you off.
No, and I may be, thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I think I can be brief. We did go through a discussion about, well, gosh, doesn't it make sense we could just roll that up? And there was discussion by Boulder that, well, we might actually be willing to defer. But the problem was that it really did become a slippery slope, that you could have that kind of process go on, and you would never have finality. I pointed out that for the very first time in the history of DRCOG, Cherry Hills Village submitted a project. It scored 55.1. And I was thinking that if nothing else for the sake of Old Lang Syne, maybe the people who had scored higher would be willing to defer and allow Cherry Hills Village at last to be funded in a DRCOG project. And we all determined that better to follow the policy and just stay with it. It can create results that it sometimes may seem hard, but we thought that it is better to do this. And secondly, that for that particular project in Superior at $600,000, that more than anything explains the rationale, purpose, and effect of the second pot, Phase 2.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Seeing none, I'll look for a motion to accept first phase and roll over. And
So moved.
we have a second. All those in favor, please signify aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstained. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Now, if we want to move on to what is in your packet listed as action agenda item number 10, move to amend the policy on the TIP preparation procedures for preparing the 2016-21 TIP to include second phase project selection attachment C in your packets. Doug again.
Great, thank you very much. Yeah, in consideration of your time this evening, I hadn't intended to basically represent the discussion that we had last month about the criteria. I think staff felt that there was some consensus on 6 of the 7 that are listed up here. What I hope to do is just concentrate on the county funding equity status and ratio portion that we had substantial discussion about last month. But of course, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have or do whatever you wish if we want to.
So are there any questions regarding the other criteria besides equity? I know we're going to get into an extensive equity discussion, but is there anything else on this list, and we did discuss it at the last board meeting, that anyone would care to have continued conversation? Seeing none, I'll look for a motion to maybe move those forward and then get into a more detailed discussion on the equity. Elise.
Madam Chair, I'd like to move that we adopt the Phase 2 TIP criteria as recommended by MVIC and outlined in the staff memo with the exception of the definition of regional equity.
All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstained? Thank you. The motion carries, and now we are going to move to the equity discussion, and that begins really on page 3 of attachment C in your packets.
Great. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Yes, and we do, as we discussed last month, we were asked to create 4 scenarios of various options that have been discussed through the last few months by various committees. And in your packet, you will see, we presented a table of those scenarios, and you'll see that there's a recommendation by basically each individual committee, and they were different. I think that the reason I put that in, it only speaks to, that there's no real perfect answer for this. I mean, I think there's a lot of discussion, and quite frankly, makes a lot of sense on multiple viewpoints with regards to this. So what we have created for you, and I just want to caveat this a little bit, it is based, we did include everything that we have knowledge of, that we could, every project that we could geographically attribute money to, we did. So that includes all first phase projects that we didn't have knowledge of at the last time we met. It also includes set-asides and off-the-top projects such as our I-70 East contribution of $25 million that was included, as well as some other projects. And there was a few others that were actually listed in the current TIP that are not being funded till the new TIP, but we also include those. So we feel pretty good about and comfortable about the actual charts themselves. And I will just throw it open and ask if there are any questions.
Well, I mean, if you don't mind, there are really two large issues we need to decide tonight. One are the years that we're going to take into consideration for the equity calculation, and the pools of money that we're going to take into consideration for the equity calculation. So given, I'm just going to present the two options. For years, it would be going back to 2003 through our current TIP 2019 versus just looking back at the last two TIP cycles plus the current TIP cycle, which is the 2008 through 2019 option. As far as the pools of money, the pools to be considered are just using DRCOG funds only that are distributed through our processes, or to consider using DRCOG, CDOT, and RTD monies that are distributed. I think it's cleaner to talk about the two things separately. Years, I'm going to just ask for consensus, and I don't care what order we do it in, whether we discuss the years issue or and then the pools of money issue. And if the group would like to discuss them both at the same time, that is certainly fine with me. Is there any consensus from the group to discuss years separately from the pools of money? If there is, raise your hand. If not, we're just going to talk about it all at once. So is there consensus to talk about years separately? To talk about the years separately from the pools? Okay, I'm not seeing a strong consensus, so let's just have at it, folks. I think I saw Suzanne's hand first. And then I need to keep a running total. I realize a lot of people are going to want to speak to this. Let me just preface it by saying I'm going to try and call on new people and not the same person over and over again. And I really apologize. If you're in that second tier, it's very hard for me to see you. So if you could wave your hands and jump up and down a little bit more effort, I just don't want to ignore you. But some of you I don't even have line of sight on. Seeing that, Suzanne, thank you.
Madam Chairwoman, we left off on this discussion last board meeting. I think it was your suggestion, Jackie, that if possible we look at this from a policy level. So I'm going to just try that. And I want to put out there that I think if what we're trying to do is look at equity, which is basically in this last 25%, look who's being left behind, where are the gaps, that it only makes sense.
Suzanne, could you, some of us are having a harder time hearing you. Could you just bring it closer to you?
Wow.
It's not me, actually.
Okay.
I hear you just fine.
If we're really going to look at equity and figure out where the gaps are, where the holes are, who's being left behind, I think it only makes sense to look at all three buckets. I know that we only control DRCOG money, and yet that the three buckets determine who's getting their transportation projects funded. And so I think if we're going to look at this last 25%, we really need to look at who's not getting their projects funded. So I think that's a pretty strong value. Regardless of how it comes for your jurisdiction, we need to look the most broadly to really figure out where the gaps are. The other thing I would note is on the timing, again, we should look at the broadest possible timing, so that if somebody had a couple good years, it's averaged out. Somebody had a few bad years. Again, the whole point is to look and make sure that our region is moving forward together, so that nobody is left behind over a larger block of time. So I feel less strong about the timing than I do about the three buckets, but I do think those are two important values that we should be looking to in the solution. I'll also note, for what it's worth, that was staff's original recommendation to MVIC, that we proceed in that manner, and I think that there's a lot of value to that and a lot of thinking that went into that. So I would like to make a motion that we proceed with scenario number 4, which is the longest time frame and all three buckets, as the best way to really look at equity. Okay, and I realize there was a second on that, and
I understand there's a lot of discussion that's going to happen, and I want to assure everyone that wants to speak to this issue, you will have an opportunity to speak to this issue. So we've got a motion and a second. Let's have some discussion. Don Rogier.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I disagree, and I'm going to vote in opposition to this motion as far as all three buckets. We at DRCOG work together very well in this entire Denver metro area, and we have control of what we have control of, and we do not have control of DRCOG dollars, CDOT dollars and our RTD dollars, and we've seen that in multiple occasions. If you want to even include RAMP, those RAMP dollars were allocated. It was a CDOT project, and it had positive effects, but we're seeing some shortcomings there right now with the request for additional RAMP dollars. We need to concentrate on the bucket of money, those dollars, those investments that we have here at DRCOG. When we start including all the buckets of money that are out there, where do we stop? There are so many different buckets here of, well, you know, you have investment from a larger company or this or that. Where do we go? Where do we stop? That bucket needs to be the DRCOG, where we have the dollars, where we allocate, where we discuss, where we put in, we follow our criteria, and I don't believe we should include CDOT dollars, nor should we include RTD dollars, because in many cases it doesn't consider where RTD has come in and invested in one place but took away a lot more in other areas. Thank you.
Chris Nevitt, and then I have Bill Holen.
Thank you. It's encouraging. I mean, Suzanne got us off on the right track. We are arguing about policy here, not just picking a formula that, you know, it turns out to be best for our county. I would on that basis, I would make an argument for the 2008 to 2019 time frame rather than the 2003 time frame. And let me just ask
Chris, can we just say that's scenario 2 in your packet, just so people can follow along? That's scenario 2.
What's scenario 2 and it's scenario 4? I mean, there's
Yeah.
2 time frames, and then there's 2 piles of money, and it sort of forms a 2
I
by
know.
2 table.
Right, it's scenario 2 in your packet, I meant, Chris, just so people could see which one you were referring to. That's all I was trying to suggest there. Sorry, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No, I get it. But
Okay.
the clarification I want to make is the 2008 to 2019 time frame is what we're proposing is a rolling window. So when this gets done in the next tip cycle, the window will roll to 2015 to 2000, whatever the hell it is. So that the 2003 scenario is a continuously unfurling road of projects. So we've started in 2003 for some reason, and we simply continue to count for eternity. And I would argue that it makes a lot more sense to have a rolling window. I think everybody would agree that the project that was built and funded in 2003 really doesn't matter as much. I mean, it's important, but it doesn't matter as much as the project that was funded today. And so to continue to count the projects that recede further and further into the past as of the same value as the projects we are building today seems perverse. And so I would argue for that
Scenario 2 in our packet.
the rolling window, and as it happens, scenario 2 in the packet, because I agree with my esteemed colleague from Boulder that if we're talking about equity, we're talking about how much money you're getting of other people's money to build transportation stuff. So it matters if you've gotten a lot of CDOT money. It matters if you've gotten a lot of RTD money, because that's goes into building transportation in your jurisdiction. I mean, looking down the game tree, I think that probably screws Denver. But that's, you know, I'm making a principled argument here. I think it makes sense to include those 3 buckets because those 3 buckets are the other people's money that we work with to fund our transportation infrastructure.
Thank you. I have Bill Holen, I have John Dyack, and before you speak, did I miss someone that would like to speak to this, or we can wait? Yes, and then George. Okay. And Elise, excuse me. Bill.
Madam Chair, I would support my colleague from Denver in that I think it's better to have a moving window rather than go back to the beginning of funding time, as he put it. I think we need a fair appraisal of existing programs that we can focus on rather than go back. And in addition, I really don't have a problem either way with respect to whether we go with scenario 1, which would only look at DRCOG funding, or scenario 2, which looks at other sources of funding. The question being, how does that impact upon the issue of over and under evaluations to really give us a true sense of what equity really means.
Thank you, John.
Let me speak to the pots of money first. I'm with Commissioner Rozier. I'm just going to echo what Commissioner Rozier said. We can control that money, and that money only. Where do we stop? For me, in a town, should you include county money? How far do you go? I don't know. I like the finality of DRCOG only money being utilized in this calculation of equity. And number 2, I'm less. I don't want to emphasize it more, but I'm good with either of the time periods. But to me, maybe the terminology of equity. Equity in my world defines permanence, and you go back as far as you can to have reliable data so you can define truly what equity is. A rolling return is a moving target, and if we truly want to identify who needs to be trued up in the spirit of phase 2, to me, I would go for the longer time period, but again, I don't really have a great preference either way.
George Teal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, as representative of Castle Rock, the county seat of Douglas County, I almost don't have a dog in this fight. I look on each one of these scenarios, and Douglas County keeps showing up with just about the shortest or the lowest calculation. But just in terms of speaking for or against scenario number 4, it's pretty interesting that we have the representative from Arapahoe County, we have the representative from Jefferson County, we have the representative from Denver, and then we have my neighbor from Parker all speaking out against scenario number 4. Guys, this is starting to firm up to be a really easy decision as a no vote for scenario number 4.
Not so fast. I think
Excuse me. Excuse me, Elise. I was distracted by the council member from Denver. Was that on purpose? Before you speak, I saw a number of hands fly up. If I could just get an order of, I know Herb, and then Kath. Oh, then excuse me, Sue, and then did I see Phil? Okay, I apologize. No more talking to the chair. All right, Elise, thank you.
Sure. Just a correction. I heard Chris Nevitt speak in favor of the 3 pots of funding. I heard Bill Holen say you could go either way. So I'm going to speak in favor of the motion, but with a strong emphasis on the 3 pots. I'm less wedded to the number of years. And here's why. We've always done it this way because all 3 agencies work closely and collaboratively in deciding transportation funding. We just had Myron come here say, hey, we're short on this project. Would DRCOG kick in? We had CDOT show up and say, hey, we need some money from DRCOG on I-70 East. I sit on the stack as your representative. The conversations are about collaborating to try to fix transportation problems. And so when this Phase 2 idea was originally envisioned, it was figuring out regional equity based on all three pots of funding. That's how it's always been done, because that actually addresses equity. If we were to move to a single pot of money, jurisdictions would effectively compete for RTD money and compete for CDOT money, and if they get some, they can come to the DRCOG table and compete yet again with the counties and the cities that got none of CDOT or RTD money. So those jurisdictions are doubly penalized, and we frequently have the conversation here at DRCOG about the transit haves and the transit have-nots and what we're going to do about that. Right now our jurisdictions are all paying into the RTD sales tax pot, but we're not all reaping the benefits equally. Hopefully that will change over time. I'm not picking on you, Bill, but to not have that reflected in the regional equity consideration is a really, really hard pill to swallow for jurisdictions, and they're around the region, that don't yet have their transit come into town. And so it's important as we sit at the table and look at the transportation system as a whole that we're taking into account that. I would also argue that the RTC, when they had a chance to look at that, also said 3 pots of funding absolutely, because we collaborate, again, CDOT, RTD, and DRCOG together. It only makes sense to look at it that way. And it was also the staff's recommendation originally, again, because this has served us well in making these decisions, these Phase 2 TIP decisions over the last handful of years. So, and I guess all of the analysis that staff does around transportation includes all 3 pots of funding. So to artificially just pull out one is to miss some of the big pieces in our analysis as we move forward with MetroVision or other metrics in the transportation system. So I think we should recognize that if we were to move to a single pot, we would be making a fundamental change away from how we've done it in the past, and there needs to be a reason for that. And I haven't seen a compelling reason made. Yes, we have control over DRCOG funds, but we use that control in order to actually address regional equity issues and make sure that across the region everybody gets their piece of the transportation pie, at least at a little bit. So I would argue, again, in favor of the motion.
Okay, thank you. Herb.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm still listening to everyone's comments, but I wanted to bring up something that this happened with us at the NADA meeting last week. We heard the same comments from CDOT at MVIC last week. As we look around the transportation policies and the funding that's going on, what we heard last week at 2 different meetings is that CDOT has a shortfall on every ramp project in the area, not just one, but all of them. So they're coming back looking for money for every project, not just 1 or 2. They don't know how much they're underrun or how much overspent they are. So as we start to look at these things, we keep in mind we're trying to get equity around the entire area and looking with CDOT to try to figure out. Now CDOT's coming saying we need more money. Well, at which project are you going to figure out that you need more money for when they all need it? So I think as we're trying to make decisions on what pot of money we're using or what scenario we're going to go through, we're going to get more requests back from, I'm surprised RTD hasn't made one yet, Bill, because I know you're short a few $1 million. But to Elisa's point, we're trying to get transportation equity throughout the entire metro region. So as we look at the decision of which equity scenario we're going to go to, we have to keep in mind that we're competing with dollars that are not there, both in RTD and CDOT, as well as trying to fund what we have control over as we're moving forward.
Thank you. Sue.
So I almost wish that we didn't have these charts, because I think the issue that we're trying to get to is equity, not who gets more money here with this formula or who gets more money with that formula. And to me, if you're looking for equity, first of all, we'll never have a perfect solution. This is not. This is equity based on counties. There are still municipalities within counties that may end up with no money, and the county's over, but the municipality's never gotten an award. This is our best stab at equity, and if we're looking for equity, then we really need to consider every piece of equity. That means, to me, all of the major pots of money. We have four. I guess I can't remember when the original letter was signed between CDOT and DRCOG, but we have worked together on trying to fund as many projects as we can for longer than I've been on the board, and I'm one of the ones that's been here more than six years.
Bragger.
Yeah. I don't know if that's bragging or what it is, but anyway, I think you look at all the funding sources, and I think you take the longest period of time that you can. I recognize that dollars depreciate in value as you move forward, but they're equal for each year. So for those two reasons, I'm in favor of the motion as made. Scenario 4 takes all the pots of money, and it takes the longest period of time. I don't know that 23 is cast in concrete for future groups. Certainly it could roll forward. It's the first year, as I understand it, for which we have all the statistics, and so that's why we used it.
I had Phil, and then Don, if you would allow the chair to make comments before we do the second rounds. So, Phil?
Thank you, Madam Chair. In dealing with the period of time first, some of the interest was whether to deal with what was 4.5 cycles, which was going back to 2003, or to look at, because there's some gray area in when you get to 4 or 4.5, but that's why it goes back to 2003 if I remember the practical issues around that. Recognize that there's changes that occur over time among various different communities and where we are, and part of the interest in going to the shorter time frame was being able to say this is closer to where we are now than, and included 3 cycles. So 2 of the current cycles, and the current cycle as has been done in whatever occurs in phase 1, and 2 past cycles. So that represents a fairly significant time frame. I understand some of the logic about going back to the time of the troglodytes and trying to hold on to that. I understand the time value of money changes over time, so that older evaluations get lost anyway in some of that. It was trying to stay, okay, from a practical perspective, try and stay with 3 cycles, and we can hold on to that. Is it something I'll fall on my sword on? Not necessarily, but it was meant to be one of those things which is stay with the current pieces, recognizing that we do have some changes that are occurring in this cycle. Okay, first of all, we've gone to a 75-25 split. We've done some changes in the allocation across the pools in phase 1, and so recognize phase 1 has typically been one of those things where we've looked at the bigger projects. And so this is when we get down to the second set of projects. And the question is, where do these projects occur, and how do we deal with them, is one of those things that ends up being a little confusing, I suppose, or challenging. Recognizing there is no absolute scoring that occurs in phase 2. This is somewhat, how do we look at a bunch of things in Tier 1, where we have a Tier 2, it's a bunch of considerations, and we all roll up our sleeves around the table and go through this. And so the question is, what's the one that's going to give us information that's probably is current? And I think looking at the current list of project submissions, ones that didn't make it in phase 1, and the more recent, but at least the long enough time frame that a lot of things have been blended out, work pretty well. So that was first on the time frame. Second is with regard the pools. I'm going to support Commissioner Rozier on this, in looking at the CDOT pool, or the CDOT and the RTD pool, because there's some communities that don't get CDOT or RTD money in this, and this is to some extent some of our pool. It doesn't mean that we don't get requests and dialogue and conversation that comes in some of our phase 2 considerations, because it is a dialogue. So if I had to pick my ideal, it would probably be scenario 1, just to kind of confuse everything across here, because it tends to keep it cleaner with things that are more recent. It tends to deal with the dollars that DRCOG has to allocate, and it deals with those items. And just recognize that there's an additional change that we've also made that has impacted some of phase 1, and that is, rather than looking at total project cost, it's looking at what's the requested dollars that have come in. So there are some changes, and so when folks say this is the way we've always done it, recognizing it's not the way we've always done it, we've made some changes.
Thank you. And ironically, I'm also in favor of scenario 1, and I am doing, and it is based on our process. Frankly, if you look to see where Douglas County comes down, they don't fare the best in in scenario 1. And part of it, I mean, I think Elise raised a point, why would we change it? If you know, this is the way we've always done it. Well, reflecting back on our TIP processes, the communities that have been under equity have continued to be under equity every single time we've done it the way it's always been done. The communities that are furthest under equity have remained furthest under equity through this analysis. And this is phase 2. This isn't, if all we wanted to do was be equal, then we would take all the money, divide it up by all the people, and distribute it back out to the counties. We have a phase 1 process and a phase 2 process. And the phase 2 process was created with the intention of trying to bring some equity to the financial funding for all of the counties. And when we realized that, gee, that leaves small communities out, the board, in its wisdom, in my opinion, said, wait, we can't just look at the financial equity. We need to, because sometimes, as was pointed out at this table, a county can be at or over equity, but there are smaller communities that haven't gotten projects. So in an effort to be equitable, in the second phase of our process, we have said, okay, let's look at who has not been getting money from, in my opinion, it should be just DRCOG. We cannot control where the money, where CDOT and RTD spends their money. We can influence it, but not control it. We have some say in our own process, separate from our collaborations with those entities, about how the money should be distributed in phase 2. In my mind, the reason to change the way we've done it is because the way we have done it has not resolved the under equity issue for those communities that have continued to receive less and less at the DRCOG table. And the small communities not being able to achieve some equity has been addressed by bringing the small communities into this discussion and prioritizing the under equity and small communities together. And I think the intent is to make our process at DRCOG more fair. And in my mind, the way to do that is to look at the DRCOG money. I also agree that the shorter years makes a lot of sense too. I think the CDOT money and RTD money in the past goes to these larger regional projects that really benefit more than just Denver when there's an investment on I-70 or in T-Rex. And that money, because if we include the CDOT and the RTD monies, counts against Denver 100%, even though most communities at this table benefit from the project, the T-Rex project, and any I-70 improvements. And I don't think it's fair for the communities that are adjacent to I-25 or 36 or I-70 to be burdened with the total cost of a major regional improvement targeted at only their community. when we're all receiving regional benefit. But if we're looking at equity in the second phase of our DRCOG process, in my mind, from a policy perspective, am I talking too close to my mic again? In my mind, from a DRCOG policy perspective, the better policy is to just look at DRCOG money, to condense the years so some of these projects do drop off, and to try and attain some level of equity, which, again, I will tell you, has not been done if you look at some of the numbers for some of these counties. Thank you for your patience with me. I had Ron, and then I have Doug, and then Don. And I am going to make you wait again because I've got Ashley, and then Don. I'm not forgetting you. I'm just letting, and Roger. Okay. I'm sorry. Ron, please.
In the interest of time, I think in listening to Mr. Nevitt's arguments and the chair, I think I will take his piece on the shorter time, and I'll take the chair's piece on DRCOG money only, and thereby go for scenario 1.
Scenario 1. Now I would like to go to Doug.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Being a believer in creating the most elegant, efficient, effective statistical analyses, I went through and I just looked at the 4 scenarios. And I looked at the percentages, not just the over-under, but I looked at the percentages and just rank ordered them across the boards. And using scenarios 1, 2, 3, and 4, you find that there is, as I mentioned at the last meeting, because we did have some of this discussion at MVIC too, there is essentially no change. Broomfield, 3 1s and a 2. Denver, a 1, a 3, and 2 2s. Weld, a 7 and 3 8s. Adams, 3 3s and a 4. You get the picture that they all generally end up in the same place. So the effect of this decision is not all that big in terms of the actual process. The policy, I think, is important. And I am persuaded, as Mayor Rakowski is, relative to the shorter time frame and not going back and dredging up from a long time ago. I think a rolling window is the way we looked at it at MVIC, and I think it does make sense. So I like that. And then relative to looking at the DRCOG dollars, I think the chair makes a good point that there are regional dollars on regional projects that really are not part of the calculus when looking at equity, because it's just looking for the definition of equity here. And because I am comfortable that all of the scenarios, based upon my highly sophisticated statistical analysis that I have conducted here, ultimately achieve the same result, I like the optics and the policies as stated by using a shorter time window with just the DRCOG dollars. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ashley.
You know, I think what's important from my perspective is that people who have not had a chance to get transportation dollars are able to provide services to their citizens. And so I think from a citizen perspective, it seems more equitable to me to use all 3 pots of money. You don't know whether your road is being funded necessarily from CDOT or DRCOG. You just know that it stinks. And so I think from that perspective, I favor the 3 pots. I do favor moving the window as time goes on. I don't feel strongly whether we start at 2003 and move the window or we start at 2008 and move the window, but I think that addresses the issue of fairness that has come up. Like, if you do have a regional project that runs through your area, that should be erased at some point in time. And I think by rolling the window, whether we start at 2003 and roll it and 2008 and roll it, I think that that helps address that. It took getting elected to public office for me to sit and think about the difference between equity and fairness. And my background's in engineering, so that's not something I'd ever given much thought to before. But I think the most equitable thing is probably to use all 3 pots of money if you're thinking about equity and funding, and I can see arguments for why it may be more fair to use the DRCOG pot only, but I don't think that's the most equitable way to divide the money. And so if it were just up to me, I would probably be in favor of scenario 2, but I'm very comfortable with scenario 4.
Okay, Roger.
Great discussion, no doubt, and I think it's already been said. And when we look at Douglas County, I think we're in the bottom of the pit looking up. So guess what we're looking at? Golly. Anyway, we're looking at some wonderful people up top. That's what where were you going? I certainly think, Rex, you mentioned that, and I know our former chair of DRCOG made that very well known, and it's a very true statement. If you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And I always say, if you're at the table and you want to have discussion, better bring your checkbook. So, if you really want to look at it from a standpoint of the pot of money, relationships matter. And that really means if you have a seat at the table, you can state your case. When I look at it, all 56 of us have that chance, they have the opportunity to have the seat at the table here. But we do not have the chance to have that seat at the table at DRCOG, or excuse me, at CDOT or RTD. We have representatives, but I am not at that table, so I cannot state my case. I cannot make my relationships. I think that's a very important for us to take in consideration. And the other thing I'd look at is the other pots of money that everybody has available to you, whether it's your own jurisdiction's money, whether it's a grant, whether it's private funds. There's a lot of other money that comes in. I would beg the question and say, should we look at all those factors when you are looking at each project that gets completed? I say no. I think we leave it to DRCOG only.
Okay, I have a couple people that are requesting to speak. I've got Ron and Suzanne, and we did hear from them already. I'm just wondering, and before, I'm not forgetting you, before we go back to them, is there anyone who has not spoken that would care to speak? And by all means, you don't have to. Okay, thank you, Ron, and then I'll go to Suzanne. Oh, Don, God bless America. I'm sorry.
Well, he is a veteran, you know.
Ron, that's the nicest thing somebody's called me all day, so thank you, Madam Chair. I would just like to, and thank you for allowing me to speak again, and just to bring up, we talk about all the pots of money, all the buckets of dollars that are out there. And we talked CDOT and RTD, and as you mentioned, Madam Chair, we have influence, but we're not there. We don't have a voting right on those boards. And a prime example of that is with RAMP. And what we saw as a board here, what we had to do in Scramble. Were those RAMP projects vetted against INVIC? You know, were they vetted against our and looking through when they made the decision at CDOT? And no. So it was shoehorned in. Were those the number 1, 2, and 3 projects that the DRCOG board would have voted on? No. And so that's just a prime example of $1 billion being allocated that makes a huge impact, a huge difference to what we're talking about right here that we had very little influence on. And it required us to scramble in great measure. Is that an understatement, Jennifer? Then, you know, in Ashley, I understand what you're going through because I, too, I'm an engineer. And I try to minimize my variables. And there are 2 variables up there that I cannot control that if we identify them and if we keep them as part of this equation, CDOT and RTD, I can't control what they choose to spend those dollars on, the direction of which they go. And CDOT has made a point for the last couple years that no new capacity projects will be funded by CDOT. There will have to be a P3 partnership. Well, how do P3s play into this equation? How do we put that? Is that a CDOT? Well, no, that's HPTE. RT. So when you start getting into P3s, when you start looking at rail P3s, CDOT P3s, all the other private P3s, we open up a can of worms because so many things can contribute to our community as far as multimodal transportation. And there's one group that we have control on. There's one pot, there's one group, and that's DRCOG. Thank you.
Suzanne. Suzanne and then Bob. I'm going to let Suzanne go first. I'm sorry.
Okay, this has been a great discussion. Thank you, everybody. I'm still very, very convinced that 3 buckets makes the most sense. People talk about what we control. There are a lot of things we don't control. It's about what we can do as a body to make things more equitable. And that involves those 3 buckets because that's what's in play here. And so how do we look at how that spending is and adjust it accordingly? And I'm glad that we've changed our criteria to also look at very small communities and prioritize that as well. That's separate. That's good. That's a change. And it also makes sense that we look across the 3 buckets and try to make that equitable. So, and that is I think I started my motion by saying that to me is what's most important. The timing thing to me is, I'm a little more fluid, and I'm fine if listening to people, if people want to go with the rolling window, that's fine with me. So I think in the interest of trying to problem solve together, that I would like to amend my motion to adopt the 2008-2019 time frame, which would make my motion more about scenario 2. And I'm not sure about my second, so I should check, but I would like to amend my motion accordingly.
Is there a second to that? I don't remember. Is it Dennis? Did you say yes? Okay. All right, so that...
Madam Chair, I'd like to speak to the amendment.
You'd like to speak to the amendment? Yes, Mayor Rakowski.
I think the commissioner from Boulder shows great sense, common sense, and a sense of consensus. And I would strongly support her amendment.
Bob.
So, yeah. Yeah, I don't think this one works as well. So can you hear? I don't know if this micro.
You can only hear me, evidently. Evidently me, and me very loud.
Okay, all right, that's a lot better. So great discussion. I agree with everyone. This is just great discussion. I do support the 3 buckets, but the concern I have is when CDOT comes to us and asks for money, when that would be taken away from the whole idea of equity. So for me to support the 3 buckets, I'm okay to use it because you're right, the citizens doesn't know where it comes from. I completely agree. But I don't like the idea that we would open a door to RTD or CDOT to come in and request money to fulfill projects that they've done. That's just my concern because that does take away food from the folks we're trying to help out here, in my opinion. So I think we need to keep that in mind because if I know there's
No, finish your thought, and then Jennifer
Okay.
wants to make a comment.
And maybe it's a clarifying comment. I don't know the whole story, but I just take a little bit through this heated conversation. The request, I think it was at MVIC. I'm not sure they're here tonight,
They were.
but you know, I think I take some reservation with that request. So that's just my opinion, and I'll support the motion.
Jennifer.
Yeah, I just want to clarify because CDOT and RTD are both allowed to submit projects, and you do fund them from time to time. You've put, I don't know what the number is, several million into fast tracks. You've supported other projects that CDOT has funded as well. And while I got the microphone, I'll just say, as we talked about a year or so ago, CDOT's going to be coming back to you. My guess, many times on many ramp projects. So tonight's request won't be the last.
So help me understand.
But they could just
That
and
has
I don't
nothing
know
to do
if
with this.
if there's anything
It
on
has
the
nothing to do
list
with it.
that you just
Okay,
approved.
that's what I need clarification on. That so they would
Has
never
nothing-
pick out of
they'll
the
be, they'll be
phase
doing
2
that.
Or
They'll be
RTD
doing that
project
anyway.
on it.
in their normal request process.
Right. In the TIP process, the same time you submit projects, they are a qualified sponsor as well.
All right, and then I'll take my question with staff later, details with the request. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. I see Kathy and Bill. Hold on. No, you don't? I don't see Kathy?
No, you do. I wasn't sure which one first.
Oh, you, Kathy, and then
Okay.
Bill.
So I have to tell you, I've been going back and forth through all of this, and I can make cases many different ways. What comes to mind is if we really do take the small community is now going to be of a high consideration when we get to this second phase, a lot of this does, I mean, I don't think Denver's going to be in the running anywhere in, you know, I mean, I'm just saying how many of these counties have small communities? It changes it. It really does change what we're doing. So we can look at all of these charts now, but if you're going to change how we really look at it, it may be different. So I think we're going to go through all this, and after a cycle, we're going to go, oh my gosh, we have to look at this again, because now if we're really trying to help the small communities, did we do what we thought we were going to do? And I have a hard time with all three, mostly because all three hurts the small communities the most in my mind. So, you know, Douglas County small communities don't have much of a chance of ever getting RTD money, so it really makes their under equity better, but how do they compete? So I have trouble with that, and so it goes back and forth. So I tell you, I haven't quite made up my mind what I'm going to do, but I do have concerns that whatever we decide is going to look different when we actually apply it to that small community.
How unusual for the DRCOG.
Yes,
board
I
table.
know. I think that's why I'm trying to anticipate how that's going to work, and it's probably killing me.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In the interest of the collaborative nature of this great and auspicious body, I would like to acknowledge the efforts of our City Councilwoman from Boulder, who has brought us together, and in respect of that intellectual balance that we all play here, I will move my support as Arapahoe County to scenario number 2.
Elise.
Well, I don't know if I want to get in the way with that kumbaya moment. Maybe we should vote while we're in a good place. I just wanted to clarify that I think the way the Phase 2 discussions will go with small communities is that small communities won't have to be in an under equity or over equity community necessarily. That will be one of the criteria that comes up in the discussion. It's an organic, qualitative discussion that happens with Phase 2. I would also note, I don't know if that hurts or helps the discussion, but the largest number of small communities happens to be in Boulder County. So I think that we have the opportunity, and we have as a body highlighted the issue of small communities, such that I think that they will get some due consideration regardless of where we end up and how we define regional equity. We've highlighted, I mean, 3 pots, for example. I think we will be talking robustly about small communities. And I also want to highlight the fact that I appreciate my sister's movement to try to reach consensus, and I would support the revised motion as well.
But actually, I really do think it's important that everyone be allowed to speak tonight, so
You don't have a choice.
okay, I don't have a choice. Pardon me? Yeah, do we have a second for that? Oh, yeah, I didn't recognize you. Yeah, I'm gonna. I did before. No. Let me just say, before you called before I heard some outbursts that I am choosing to ignore, there were board members who have not had a chance to speak tonight, and I would like to be able to hear from them. So the person I was going to acknowledge next, before I saw 2 hands up. I'm going to acknowledge Val, George, and then I will be acknowledging Mayor Tisdale.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. You know, I've been sitting here trying to figure this whole thing out. Let me just give you, I guess, my thinking of what the Phase 1 and Phase 2 is all about, the way I have worked with it for the last 5 years. And that is, in Phase 1, we have developed some criteria. So we get, assign some points, very cut and dry. The Phase 2 portion was, in my view, was let's go back and take a look. Did our point system not work right? Did we oversee some other stuff? And we reestablished some different criteria to be able to figure out how we can go back and justify or get an equity on the first phase. So therefore, what my feeling is that, you know, we can't do that by throwing in CDOT and RTD money in there, because we're looking at how do we go back, track, and take a look and see what we did wrong in the first phase. That's the way I see it from the standpoint. The second point I want to make, if you take a look at the figures in there, if you're going to do a little, I mean, we have what, $51 million for phase 2? If you take a look at throwing all the 3 pots, you're talking, in scenario 2, you're talking about $6.4 billion. I'm not sure what $51 million is going to equalize there at all whatsoever. Right. If you're looking at DRCOG only, you're looking at $600 million. Okay, so where you can accomplish a little bit more, in my view. $51 million in $6.4 billion is just going to get lost, and you're not going to see anything at all. Nothing is going to change. That's right. Everything's going to be remaining the same.
Excuse me. Thank you, George.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Val, that was a great point. You know, but Elise actually made the key point for me. And going back and looking at it, you know, the county that does have the highest concentration or the most number of small communities, which is another one of our, you know, criteria here, is Boulder County. I'm going to call a spade a spade. You know, scenario number 2 is double dipping on behalf of Boulder County. You're getting an under equity. You know, so I mean, I'd speak in favor of scenario number 1, not scenario number 2, because it doesn't bring us equity.
Mayor Tisdale, I believe you were next.
I respectfully call the question.
Do I have a second for the respectful request?
Second.
I do. Seeing that, we are going to stop discussion on the scenario, and we're going to vote. We're going to vote, excuse me. We're voting to stop discussion. And, yes, so all those in favor of stopping discussion, I'm going to have you raise your hand. Please raise your hand. Okay, I think we're all set on stopping discussion on this particular vote. So now we move to now we move to the motion, which, to clarify for everyone, is scenario number 2, 3 pools of money, and the 2008 to 2009 cycle time. But basically, what 19? Excuse me. What that means is the past 2 tip cycles and the current tip cycle. That it's not going to remain those years. It's going to evolve. So that is the question. 3 pools of money, 2008, 2019. And we will need to see hands again. And all those in favor of that, please raise your hand. Is that a majority? All those opposed? The motion passes. The equity funding scenario will be scenario number 2. Oh, excuse me. Were there any people who abstained on the vote? Chickens? No. Just kidding. Just kidding. There were none. That's why I said it. I'm bringing a little levity, even though it didn't go my way. All right. Moving on to our agenda. Before we move on, I actually think it was a very productive discussion. I want to thank everyone. We heard from most of the people at the table for contributing to that conversation. Okay, moving along. We are moving on to attachment number E. Item number 12, move to approve an amendment to the 2012, 2017, and 2016-21 policy on tip preparation related to delayed projects. Doug Rex.
Great, thank you, Madam Chair. The board will recall last month we had a a discussion, and it was in response to a Wheat Ridge project. It was a Kipling Trail project, and staff from Wheat Ridge are here again tonight. Thank you very much for coming. Where we there was the chance, or as stated in the board policy, that they were to have their monies removed from the federal portion of the monies from their project, which is compatible with the TIP policy documentation. And what you asked us to do in response to that was really to go back and what we took away from the meeting were three areas that you wanted some additional information and us to draft an amendment to that TIP policy for your consideration. And those three themes that we took away were provide an opportunity for board appeal. I think there were some that were surprised maybe that there wasn't an opportunity for appeal, and we attempted to do that. The actual draft language that is it was done in cooperation with staff and TAC is provided in your attachment 1, and you'll see within red is where we tried to address that theme, and you'll see the sponsor may appeal at the next available board meeting to explain reasons why the delayed project has not been initiated. The second theme that we took away from last month's meeting was to allow for a variance for two situations, for unforeseen events such as flooding or what have you, and we're all certainly familiar with that, or if the project was close but didn't quite meet the deadline. And we tried to do that really in two places, and I actually only highlighted one, but there really are two. And the variance itself, which is listed as number 2, and this is one of the 2 board options that's available once the member local government comes and presents their case to you. The first, of course, is that you can deny the request. Second is to allow that variance. And we suggest in the language that extension be no longer than 120 days. And it'll be judged on a case-by-case basis by you all, but that is the recommendation that came from TAC and staff. The other area that it also mentions, I might just point out here, is is in the first sentence. It talks about if in the following year the sponsor fails to achieve initiation of the delayed phase by October 15th. The October 15th date was put in there. It was actually a TAC suggestion. Was that in the event that they resolve the issue that they have prior to the board meeting, that that basically it provides staff with a little bit of latitude, that it then does not need to be heard at the board meeting, because that would occur at a date later than October 15th. It would be obviously the third Wednesday of the month. So so that was included there as well. Lastly, to remove the requirement for reimbursement of federal funds expended on the project. And there was a discussion in particular about the Wheat Ridge project that, you know, for monies that they had successfully been able to move the project forward on certain phases, that maybe there shouldn't be a requirement that federal funding be repaid by the community. And we addressed that in a couple different places. The first being, you know, your first option of denying the request. The sponsor shall stop payment on all future reimbursement payments requests beyond September 30th. So anything before that time period would not have to be reimbursed. And the language is basically the same in 2 there, as well as just more in general terms in the third red line section there. So those were the 3 that we took away for the meeting. I'd be happy to address or answer any questions you may have.
Mayor Rakowski.
Recognizing what Federal Highway did to the Atlanta MPO, taking away money, how can we say that you don't have to reimburse it when the feds may require you to? Are you going to basically put us in opposition to the feds?
Well, I'm not familiar with what you're referring to exactly in Atlanta.
Well, Atlanta had a project that was on the books, and it kept being delayed and delayed and delayed, and it was delayed basically 10 years. And FWA said, we're done. Send it back, period. No discussion. That's the way and Jennifer, is that the way you remember it? Or
Honestly, I'm somewhat like Doug. I know that occurred, but I don't know the particulars of it to speak
well, the point is they took it
on
back.
it this evening. I can check up that.
So that's
and that to be
I
sure
don't
that you don't
disagree
pass
with the
something that.
philosophy you're trying to come through with, but let's look at reality. Have a philosophy that can't withstand the test of federalism.
Right. Well, it's certainly a legitimate point, but I will say that here, which is not, it varies around the country about what we use our SDP monies for, our DRCOG monies for. Some regions only spend their pot of money, their sub-allocation on the actual construction of projects, whereas here we also include the soft costs, the engineering, right-of-way utility relocation, that type of thing. I think theoretically what this would allow would be to treat the phases that they were successful in meeting the deadline to exist as a separate project, as a standalone project. So for example, the engineering design work, that would be treated as a separate project and is eligible certainly for federal funding. That would be able to stand on its own.
I too have some questions regarding this policy. It was my thought that at the end of our discussion regarding the Wheat Ridge project, we all had sentiment for the fact that special circumstances existed and we wanted to make an allowance, but that we thought that there should be some consequence for failing to meet the deadline, and that my thought was direction was given to staff to go to MVIC and discuss having some consequence be included in this policy as well, that there be some teeth. For example, Wheat Ridge self-imposed their own. They resubmitted their project and lost one of their tip submittals. You know, we're all allowed a certain number of tip submittals, and Wheat Ridge gave up one of their tip submittals in lieu of this project. So there would be some teeth, some consequence for not meeting your obligation. You wouldn't get your funding ripped away. You wouldn't, but there would be a consequence. And what bothers me about this policy is that there is no, they can come for an appeal, but there's no consequence. And in my mind, there should still be a consequence. So I have a concern. I have a concern with this. I do want the board to know we do need to act on the Wheat Ridge issue this evening, and I'm going to divorce those. We will act on that separately, but I wonder if others at the table have. Ron raised a question regarding the policy. I have a question regarding what I thought the board direction was, requesting teeth. Are there any other questions regarding the policy, not the Wheat Ridge discussion? Kathy.
I was just going to comment to Mayor Wachowski's, which would be perhaps the disclosure goes in there unless required by federal.
Oh, yeah.
You know, I mean, just put that in there. If there is something where the federal government has to reimburse, I don't think the MPO is going to take it from other projects to make up for that particular delayed project. So excellent. I might suggest those words.
Good idea.
John Dyack.
I too, Madam Chair, remember the consequence conversation. I would like to ask staff to maybe reconsider and come up with some language to give us so we can discuss.
Sure. Yeah.
Herb.
In light of what we're talking about is one that there's no consequence, which I agree it's there. The language that we're talking about, if the federal government says they're taking the money, they're taking the money. In that light, if I ask to have this item tabled, can we still continue to deal with the Wheat Ridge issue with
yes.
this one still there?
Yes.
Okay. Then I would like to make a motion to table this until the corrections are that we're asking for are added in and we can relook at it, as long as it doesn't affect the decision we need to make on the Wheat Ridge project.
And I would ask that we do that in a separate motion. The discussion, Ashley had her hand up.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, but we still have to, we can still allow discussion, yes.
Thank you, Chair. So what I understood from last time was that the deadline was 3 years in this document, and that at some point it was changed to 1 year. And it seems that with how construction is going for everyone and with the current constraints on the job market and everything, I wonder if there would be some kind of issue with changing it to like 1.5 years or 2 years, or if that would create other unforeseen issues.
Well, partly correct. The policy actually allows for for basically 2 strikes. You have, let's for the sake of argument, that you're doing a construction project and you're receiving 2013 monies. If you were supposed to get that project under contract, let's say by the end of 2014, and you're unsuccessful in doing so, you would get 1 strike. That would be your delay. The next year, if you're unable to get that project under contract, you would, based on the existing TIP policy, your project will be eliminated. So it's really 2 years that you have to meet that phasing requirement.
And is there, would there be any, like if we wanted to change that to 2.5 years, if we wanted to do a half year, does that create an issue?
Well, I don't know. It's a little awkward, I guess. I mean, I think the 120 days is basically doing that. I mean, but I think what it does, it allows the board to make that determination.
So, excuse me for interrupting. It's come to my attention that when Herb tabled this and there was second, what we do is stop discussion on this issue.
I apologize.
I'm wondering if what your intention was to actually table this or actually delay action on this. If you table it, then that we don't talk about it tonight. Is that what?
Because right now we're asking for changes
Okay.
to be made to the document, and all I'm asking for is by being tabled is to allow staff to go back and put these requests back into the document and let us look at it again.
Okay, and there is a point of order.
Right. As I understand, table would kill the issue, not just for the evening, but for the
That's what
eternity, and I believe it would be postponed. Right.
So do you want
I
to
would
table it
just
to the
ask for
next meeting?
clarification on.
If that's sufficient, because tabling doesn't put it back by a certain date. It can be taken back off the table at any time with a motion.
Right. So if you would table it till the next board meeting.
That's when do you want to bring it back? I'm not talking about it over Christmas.
Yeah, next meeting's fine.
Next meeting, fine. That's fine.
Okay. Okay.
And
so with that, we will we'll take a vote on that. But if there are outstanding questions of staff, we can ask them after we take the vote. Okay. So all those moving to table the policy language discussion until January, please raise your hand or say aye. 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 Opposed? Abstained. Okay, now if there are any questions regarding the policy we would like to discuss with staff, let's make sure we get all of them out before, so they can come back with language in January that meets our desires. So, Gabe.
I'm trying not to speak. I'm trying to keep my voice. I mean, what Ashley said is correct. It's unclear, I believe, to some members about the 1 year from 3 to 1, and now you're saying it's really kind of like 2. At least that's what I got out of it. Right. So some little bit more clarification. Is it 1 or 2? So, or do we need to move it to, 2,
3.
No, I think 3 is too long, 1's too short. Perhaps it's just 2. No halves or anything like that. But it needs to be a little bit more clear, I guess, to the membership about, okay, is it really 1 or is it kind of 2 with 1 year with 2 strikes or 2, something of that nature.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is clear within the document.
So you know what, Doug, I'm just going to ask you to take that, just take that in consideration. Of what we want to make sure it's clear. Chrissy.
Yes, thanks, Madam Chair. I guess my question and wanting for staff to sort of look at is we were thinking about some sort of consequence. When I look at this project and kind of how things happen, and what I thought we talked about at the last meeting was this project was so close to being done. So with that 120 days, there are only going to be so many projects that are actually making progress that are going to hit that 120 days. So do you still need to have some consequence for those type of projects, or if it's like you really just missed the boat, you weren't actually working on it, you really missed the boat, and then there's some consequence? So I just wanted to bring that up so we could kind of think about that a little bit, or ask staff to think about that as they put it together.
And present that back to us so we do understand it, because in my mind, I still think it makes sense to have a consequence, and because it motivates people to meet a deadline. But yeah, Kathy.
I was just going to suggest that perhaps the wording could even be that when it basically says granted on a case-by-case basis, it could also have, as consequences, be determined on a case-by-case basis. I mean, that there could be consequences, but they could be less and more severe depending on the time frame or how far you're missing something. So I don't exactly know what those would be, but it might be another way to put that in there.
And again, I would just caution us as to how many, so then when it comes to an actual project in front of us, we're not going to want to give the consequence. I would rather have it be known up front, if you miss your deadline, you've got to give up a tip project. I mean, I think that's a reasonable thing, and it motivates people to actually meet their deadline, and it's not an undue punishment, because God knows we all don't get our own tip projects. All of our tip projects are funded anyway. So, but yeah, let's keep these are the things we need to have advised staff on, and keep in mind too. Give me anything.
I know I'm kind of moving on, and I'm hoping that we didn't have too many more comments. I would like to make a motion that we do approve the variance requested by Wheat Ridge for that specific project.
May I have a second for that? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstained?
I'll kill you.
All right, thank you. So what happened? I didn't hear it. I didn't hear it. I hate to miss a joke.
No joke, no joke.
Okay. All right.
All
right, look, guys, we're almost at the end. We're almost at the party. Let's get through this.
Wheat Ridge is buying tonight.
Oh, sorry, Chris. God darn it.
I feel compelled to apologize to my hardworking DRCOG colleagues. So I came late. I had to be present at a birth, metaphorically speaking. Eva Henry knows what I'm talking about. And I have to leave early in order to be at a funeral. So and that one's literal. So that's
sorry, Chris.
Don't count
or a
on
memorial
it, Chris.
service anyway.
Chris,
Huh?
don't count on it, because you did come from Adams County, so don't count on the birth until it's here, till you see the head come out.
All right, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, Happy Holidays. All right, hug Doug on your way out. Hug Doug on your way out. Okay, now we're going to move on to action item number 13, attachment F. Move to adopt the draft 2015 policy statement on state legislative issues. Rich.
I know, I turn on.
Rich, you got 5 minutes, and maybe you don't need all of it.
Actually, can't we just move approval?
Yeah.
Can we just clarify that this, Elise, that there is no change? This was presented at our last board meeting with no change. Rich nodding, yes, that is the case. Elise.
I did.
It's Ashley seconded. There you go. All right.
Got to move quickly.
All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstained. Thank you. Motion carries. In our yeah, Rich, I appreciate your efforts. In the informational briefings, I would also request, in the interest of time, and since Chris left, and it's really no fun without Chris, is there anyone that's got something that they feel is very, very important for the good of the cause that we all need to know by the end of this year? Oh, Jayla.
Just that our RFPs for the aging dollars were released or have been released, and they're due back January 28th. So a lot of counties get funded through our program, so I just wanted to make you aware of that deadline. January 28th is when those RFPs are due back.
Thanks, Jayla. And Mayor Rakowski's got one quick one.
E470 is toll-free through midnight December 31st.
Oh, yay. So there are two information. Is there anyone else? Excuse me, I don't want to cut anyone up. Yes, Phil.
I just wanted to, because I was asked last night about Jayla's meeting on Friday for the Advisory Committee on Aging. There's a discrepancy between the website and the package. The meeting on Friday is canceled, so there is no meeting for anyone that might be confused. Don't show up.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for that clarification. Anything else? Okay, please note the two informational items in your packet. I hope everyone is going to be able to come upstairs and join us for a little refreshment to celebrate the conclusion of a tremendous year here at DRCOG. And again, thank you all for your participation at the DRCOG board table. And we all need to toast our friend Doug Tisdale, who will be coming back to visit us, I am sure, during public comment in his new role. Yes. The ghost of Christmas past. And with that, we're adjourned.